Time to get Appa a wife. Oh Lord, too much perfume, not wife material.
No, you listen to me!
Too loud, Appa would go crazy if he married this one.
Oh, cutie pie, what are you doing cleaning here?
I have found the one.
The corporate headquarters of the Wu Enterprise was a towering monument of glass and steel, a legitimate front for the city's most feared and respected underground syndicate. Zaid Wu, the head of the organization, ruled his empire with an iron fist. But inside the sweeping hallways of the 50th floor, an entirely different kind of operation was taking place. Mission Find Daddy a Wife was officially a go. 8-year-old Tay dragged a mop bucket that was nearly half his size down the pristine, marble-tiled corridor. He had managed to snag a spare gray cleaner's uniform from the supply closet in the basement. The sleeves were rolled up 5 times, and the pant legs were cuffed so high they looked like heavy donuts around his ankles. He adjusted the collar, feeling very much like an undercover secret agent. Tay was exceptionally smart for an 8-year-old, and undeniably handsome. He had inherited his striking features from his biological parents. His father had been Zaid's childhood best friend, and his mother had been the sweetest woman Zaid had ever known. A tragic car crash had claimed both their lives just days before Tay was born. Zaid, a man who dealt in shadows and violence, had sworn on his life to take the boy in, raising him as his own flesh and blood. And he had done exactly that. To Zaid, Tay was his son, the only light in his dark, work-obsessed world. But that was exactly the problem. Zaid worked too much. Tay had noticed the dark circles under his father's eyes, the way he dismissed every woman who tried to bat their eyelashes at him at corporate galas, and the lonely silence that echoed in their massive penthouse when the meetings were finally over. Tay had read enough storybooks to know that his dad needed a princess. Or, since his dad was a mafia boss, maybe a really tough queen. Tay dipped the mop into the bucket, splashing soapy water onto the floor. He pushed it around aimlessly, his dark eyes scanning the hallway for potential candidates. Candidate number 1 walked by. A tall lady with too much perfume. Tay sneezed violently as she passed. Disqualified. Candidate number 2 was on her phone, yelling at someone about a delayed shipment of silk. Too loud. Daddy already yelled at people all day. Disqualified. Tay sighed, leaning his chin on the wooden handle of his mop. Maybe finding a wife was harder than he thought. He decided to take a break and pushed his bucket toward the break room at the end of the hall. Inside the break room, Diane was standing by the high-end espresso machine, waiting for her coffee to brew. As an executive assistant for the marketing department, she had been running around since 6 in the morning, organizing schedules and putting out fires. Diane was breathtaking, though she hardly paid attention to the fact. Today, she was dressed impeccably in a tailored, cobalt blue blazer and matching wide-leg trousers, paired with a crisp white silk blouse. She had a strict personal rule about her wardrobe. She never wore green or red. Those colors just didn't suit her vibe. Her hair was styled in thick, gorgeous forest braids, currently gathered into an elegant, intricate crown atop her head, making her look regal and effortlessly chic. She tapped her manicured fingers against the counter, closing her eyes to enjoy a brief moment of peace. Squeak, squeak, splash. Diane opened her eyes and looked down. Standing just a few feet away was a tiny boy drowning in an oversized gray uniform. He was attempting to mop the break room floor, but mostly, he was just creating a giant puddle. Diane blinked, her brain struggling to process the sight. She looked around the empty break room, then back down at the child. "Excuse me," Diane said, her voice a mixture of absolute confusion and rising indignation. "What on earth are you doing?" Tay stopped mopping and looked up. His eyes widened. The lady standing in front of him was beautiful. She had warm, flawless dark skin, kind eyes, and a voice that sounded like smooth honey. She didn't smell like an entire department store perfume counter. She smelled faintly of vanilla and coffee. "I am cleaning the floor," Tay stated matter-of-factly, puffing out his chest. "It is my job." Diane felt a vein throb in her temple. Her protective instincts flared instantly. Your job? Sweetheart, you are barely taller than the espresso machine. Who let you in here? Who gave you that uniform? The closet, Tay replied simply. He leaned closer, inspecting her face. She looked genuinely worried about him. That was a major point in her favor. Candidate number 3 was looking very promising. Diane crouched down to his eye level, ignoring the fact that the hem of her expensive cobalt trousers was dangerously close to the soapy puddle. This is completely unacceptable, she muttered, mostly to herself. I know this company is ruthless, but child labor? I will personally report the facility manager to the labor board. This is ridiculous. She looked back at Tay, her expression softening into a sweet, maternal smile. Hey, little guy. What's your name? I am a cleaner, Tay said, sticking to his cover story. I don't have a name while on duty. Diane let out a short, incredulous laugh. Okay, Mr. Cleaner, have you eaten anything today? You look like you've been working hard. Tay's stomach chose that exact moment to let out a loud, embarrassing rumble. He had skipped his mid-morning snack to sneak past his bodyguards. I am a little hungry, Tay admitted, looking down at his oversized boots. Put the mop down, Diane commanded gently. She stood up and walked over to one of the sleek refrigerators, pulling out a small, fancy paper bag. I ordered from the artisan bakery down the street, but I haven't had time to eat it. You're going to sit down and eat this. She led him to a small round table in the corner of the break room. She unpacked a gourmet turkey and cheese croissant, a small container of fresh fruit, and a carton of apple juice. She handed him a napkin and pulled out a chair for him. Tay sat down, his legs dangling above the floor. He took a bite of the croissant, and his eyes lit up. He chewed happily, watching Diane as she pulled out a chair and sat across from him. She rested her chin in her hands, watching him eat to make sure he didn't choke. She is perfect, Tay thought. She feeds the hungry. She is pretty. She is angry at bad people who make children work. She dresses nice. She is the one. Is it good? Diane asked, a warm smile spreading across her face. It is very good. Thank you, miss, Tay said politely, swallowing his food. You are very nice. Do you have a husband? Diane nearly choked on her own saliva. She stared at the 8-year-old, bewildered. Excuse me? A husband, Tay repeated, picking up a strawberry. A man you are married to. Or a boyfriend? Diane threw her head back and laughed, the sound bright and musical. Tay smiled. He liked her laugh. No, Mr. Cleaner, I do not have a husband, Diane chuckled, shaking her head. Her forest braids shifted beautifully with the movement. I am very single. I work too much to go on dates. My daddy works too much too, Tay said, taking a sip of his apple juice. He is very lonely. He frowns all the time. But I think if he met you, he would smile. Diane felt a pang of sympathy in her chest. So the poor boy had a neglectful, overworked father, which probably explained why he was wandering around a corporate building pretending to be the janitorial staff. Well, your daddy is very lucky to have a smart boy like you looking out for him, but you still shouldn't be pushing heavy mops around. Tay finished the last of his fruit and wiped his mouth neatly with the napkin. Miss, can I borrow your phone, please? I need to make a very important business call. Diane raised an eyebrow but reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her sleek smartphone. Sure. Do you know the number by heart? Yes, I am a genius, Tay said modestly. Diane smiled and unlocked the screen, handing it over. Go ahead, genius. Tay dialed a number he knew better than his own. He pressed the phone to his ear, his face shifting into an expression of serious business. The line rang twice before a sophisticated, slightly sharp voice answered. Hello? Who is this? The woman on the other end demanded. Granny, it's me, Tay whispered, cupping his hand over the mouthpiece. There was a sharp gasp on the other end of the line. Tay! Oh, thank the heavens! Where are you? Your father is tearing the building apart. The security guards are crying. Tay! Crying! He threatened to feed the head of security to his dogs. Granny, listen, this is an emergency. I can't come back yet. I found her. Found who? His grandmother asked, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. The wife. For Daddy, Tay announced proudly. She is sitting right in front of me. She is beautiful. She has a blue suit, but no red or green because that is tacky. Her hair is in a crown made of braids, and she gave me a croissant. She is perfect, Granny. There was a long pause on the phone. Then, his grandmother's voice came through, filled with immense pride. You found a candidate? Already? And she fed you? Good job, my sweet boy. You truly have my excellent taste. I know, Tay said, beaming. But his grandmother's tone suddenly shifted, becoming sharp and authoritative. You are the heir to the Wu family. What are you doing making business calls from an unknown number? Are you disguised again? I swear, if you are wearing commoner clothes, I will faint. I am a cleaner, Tay admitted. A cleaner! Lord give me strength, she scolded loudly. Your father is going to have a heart attack. Stay exactly where you are, young man. I am tracking this phone number right now. We are coming to get you. The line went dead. Tay calmly handed the phone back to Diane. Thank you. My ride will be here shortly. Diane looked at the boy, amused and thoroughly charmed. Was that your mom? My granny, Tay corrected. She is very happy, but also very mad. Before Diane could ask what that meant, the heavy double doors of the break room were suddenly thrown open with such force that they crashed against the walls. The loud bang echoed through the room, making Diane jump out of her seat in shock. Standing in the doorway was a man who looked like he had walked straight out of an action movie and was ready to destroy the world. Zaid Wu was towering, broad-shouldered, and radiating an aura of pure, terrifying power. He wore a bespoke, charcoal black three-piece suit that fit his muscular frame flawlessly. His tie was slightly loosened, his collar unbuttoned, and his dark hair was a messy, frantic sweep across his forehead. His sharp, striking features were set in an expression of absolute panic and lethal rage. Behind him, 3 massive men in dark suits were panting, looking terrified. Zaid's dark, piercing eyes swept the room and immediately locked onto the tiny boy sitting at the table in the oversized gray uniform. All the breath left Zaid's lungs in a heavy sigh. His terrifying aura vanished, replaced by the sheer relief of a panicked parent. He strode across the room in long, quick steps, ignoring Diane entirely. Tay, Zaid said, his deep, gravelly voice cracking slightly. He dropped to one knee right beside the boy, his large hands grabbing the child's shoulders to inspect him for injuries. What were you thinking? Do you have any idea how scared I was? You vanished from my office. I was working, Daddy, Tay said calmly, pointing to the mop bucket. Zaid looked at the bucket, then at the ridiculous uniform his son was wearing, and rubbed his face in utter exhaustion. Working? I give you the world? And you want to mop floors? I had the entire building locked down. I almost called in a hit squad. Diane, who had been standing there in absolute shock, finally found her voice. The shock was quickly burning away, replaced by an intense, fiery anger. This massive, intimidating man was the father, the one who let his kid wander around a 50-story building unsupervised. Excuse me, Diane said, her voice cutting through the room like a whip. Zaid froze. He slowly turned his head, finally registering that there was another person in the room. He looked up, his dark eyes landing on Diane. Time seemed to stutter to a halt for Zaid Wu. He had met supermodels, heiresses, and actresses, but the woman standing in front of him made his brain completely short-circuit. She was magnificent. The cobalt blue of her suit contrasted perfectly with her radiant, flawless skin. Her forest braids were piled high like a literal crown, and her dark brown eyes were currently glaring holes into his skull. Zaid stood up slowly, using his towering height to intimidate, a habit he couldn't turn off. But Diane didn't take a single step back. She crossed her arms over her chest, lifting her chin to meet his gaze. Are you the father? Diane demanded, her tone dripping with disapproval. Zaid, a man who commanded thousands of dangerous men and made politicians tremble, found himself momentarily speechless. "I am," he managed to say, his voice deep and rumbling. "Well, congratulations, because you are incredibly careless," Diane scolded him, pointing a manicured finger at his chest. The 3 bodyguards standing by the door gasped in unison. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Zaid Wu like that and lived to tell the tale. Diane didn't care. She was on a roll. How do you lose an 8-year-old in a corporate building? Do you know I found him pushing a mop bucket twice his size? He was hungry. I had to feed him my lunch. What kind of parent doesn't notice their child is missing until they've already started a career in custodial services? Zaid stared at her. He wasn't angry. In fact, he was entirely mesmerized. The way her eyes sparked with righteous indignation, the way she fearlessly defended his son to a stranger she clearly knew nothing about. He had never experienced anything like it. "He is a very fast runner," Zaid offered quietly, feeling a bizarre need to explain himself to this beautiful, furious woman. Diane scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Oh, please, that's no excuse. You need to pay better attention to him. He's a sweet, smart boy. You should be ashamed of yourself for leaving him alone like that." Tay, who was still sitting at the table, looked between his tall, terrifying father and the beautiful, brave assistant. He took another sip of his apple juice. Mission Find Daddy a Wife was going exactly as planned. "I will. Try to be more attentive," Zaid said, his eyes never leaving Diane's face. His heart, which had been dead and dormant for nearly a decade, gave a strange, unfamiliar thump in his chest. "Thank you for feeding him, and for looking out for him." Diane uncrossed her arms, slightly disarmed by how calm and polite this giant of a man was being. "Well, just do better," she muttered, smoothing out her blazer. "I'm Zaid," he said, taking a step closer and extending a large, scarred hand toward her. Diane looked at his hand, then back up at his handsome, intense face. "Diane," she replied, shaking his hand firmly. His grip was warm and surprisingly gentle. "Diane," Zaid repeated, the name tasting like a promise on his tongue. "I have a feeling I am going to be seeing a lot more of you." Before Diane could question what that meant, Tay hopped out of his chair, abandoning his oversized mop bucket. "Daddy," Tay said, grabbing Zaid's hand. "Can Diane come over for dinner? I think she makes better food than your chefs." Zaid looked down at his son, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through his usual cold expression. "We will have to ask her very nicely, Tay." Diane stared at the massive, terrifying man and his tiny, mop-wielding son. The audacity of this family was truly something to behold. First, the child masquerades as a janitor, and now the father, who apparently owned the entire building given the terrified bodyguards hovering in the doorway, was casually suggesting she come over for dinner. "I am afraid I have to decline," Diane said, her voice steady and professional. "I have a mountain of marketing reports to file, and my shift does not end until 6. Furthermore, I do not make it a habit to go to the homes of men I have just scolded." Zaid Wu did not look deterred. In fact, the corners of his mouth twitched upward in a way that made him look devastatingly handsome. He stood up to his full height, adjusting his cuffs. "Those reports can wait," Zaid replied, his deep voice echoing slightly in the quiet break room. "As for your shift, consider it ended. I own this company, Diane. I am giving you the rest of the day off, with full pay, as a token of my gratitude for finding my son." Diane opened her mouth to argue, her pride bristling at his high-handedness. But before she could utter a single word, the break room doors were thrown open for a second time. If Zaid's entrance had been a hurricane, the woman who stepped through the doors now was a beautifully manicured tornado. "Where is he?" a sharp, aristocratic voice demanded. An elegant, formidable woman swept into the room. She looked to be in her late 60s, but carried herself with the energy and authority of an absolute monarch. She wore a pristine, white-tailored suit that screamed Parisian couture, and her silver hair was styled in an immaculate, unmoving bob. A string of pearls the size of grapes rested against her collarbone, and her sharp, dark eyes scanned the room with lethal precision. "Granny!" Tay cheered, abandoning Zaid's side to run toward the older woman. Madame Wu looked down at her grandson. Her face went through a rapid series of emotions: sheer relief, overwhelming love, and then absolute horror. She gasped, taking a step back and clutching her pearl necklace. "Tay Wu! What are you wearing?" Madame Wu cried out, her voice trembling with theatrical distress. Is that a polyester blend? And why are the pants so large? You look like a highly impoverished potato. I am an undercover cleaner, Granny, Tay explained proudly, smoothing down the front of his gray uniform. It is a disguise. It is a tragedy, Madame Wu corrected, shaking her head. She looked up and locked eyes with Zaid. Her maternal warmth vanished instantly, replaced by the terrifying glare that Zaid had inherited. You. You are a mafia boss. You command an empire. You have men who can dismantle a car in 3 minutes, yet you cannot keep track of one 8-year-old boy in your own building. Mother, I was in a board meeting, Zaid said, sounding remarkably like a scolded teenager rather than a feared underworld kingpin. He slipped out through the ventilation duct in my private bathroom. You should have narrowed the vents, Madame Wu snapped. She took a deep breath, smoothing her pristine jacket, and turned her attention to the only other person in the room. Diane stood perfectly still. She had read about Madame Wu in corporate magazines. The woman was a legendary socialite, a ruthless businesswoman, and fiercely protective of her family. Madame Wu's sharp eyes raked over Diane from head to toe. She took in the flawless cobalt blue suit, the impeccable posture, and the intricate crown of forest braids resting atop Diane's head. The older woman's eyes narrowed slightly, calculating, evaluating. So, Madame Wu said, her tone suddenly smooth and dangerously polite, you are the woman my grandson called me about, the one who does not wear red or green. Diane blinked, thoroughly confused. Excuse me? Tay trotted over and grabbed his grandmother's hand. Yes, Granny, this is Diane. She fed me a croissant, and she yelled at Daddy for losing me. She is very brave. Madame Wu's eyebrows shot up toward her immaculate hairline. She looked from Diane, who was standing tall and unbothered, to Zaid, who was watching Diane with an intensity that Madame Wu had not seen in her son for nearly a decade. She yelled at you? Madame Wu asked Zaid, a slow, wicked smile spreading across her face. She informed me that I was incredibly careless, Zaid admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. Madame Wu let out a sudden, delighted laugh. It was a rich, booming sound that completely shattered her intimidating facade. Oh, I like her. I like her very much. You have excellent taste, Tay. Madame Wu stepped forward and extended her hand to Diane. I am Madame Wu. Thank you for taking care of my wayward grandson, and thank you for putting my giant, foolish son in his place. It is a rare and beautiful thing to witness. Diane could not help but smile. She shook the older woman's hand. It is a pleasure to meet you, Madame Wu. I am just glad Tay is safe. Now, if you will all excuse me, I really should get back to my desk. Nonsense, Madame Wu declared, waving her hand dismissively. You have suffered a great emotional trauma today. Finding a lost child, dealing with my son's intimidating aura, feeding a starving heir. It is exhausting. You must come to the penthouse for dinner tonight. It is the absolute least we can do. Madame Wu, that is very generous, but unnecessary. Diane protested gently. I insist, Madame Wu said, her tone dropping into a gentle but firm command that made it clear she was not accustomed to being told no. Besides, Tay has already planned the menu in his head. I am sure of it. If you do not come, he will cry. Will you not, Tay? Tay immediately widened his eyes, his lower lip quivering with Oscar-worthy precision. I will be very sad, Diane. I might not eat anything else today. Diane looked at the boy's fake pout, then at Madame Wu's triumphant smirk, and finally at Zaid. Zaid was watching her with a quiet, hopeful expression that completely unraveled her defenses. Fine, Diane sighed, shaking her head. Dinner. But I am bringing my own wine, and I am leaving by 9. Excellent. Madame Wu clapped her hands together. Zaid will send a car for you at 7. Now, someone remove this dreadful gray fabric from my grandson before I break out in hives. At 6:30 that evening, Diane stood in front of her full-length mirror, taking a deep breath. She had gone home, showered the scent of the office off her skin, and restyled her forest braids. She let them down from the crown, allowing the long, neat twists to fall beautifully past her shoulders, framing her face. She had chosen her outfit carefully. Remembering her own strict rule, she bypassed the emerald and ruby dresses in her closet. Instead, she slipped into a stunning tailored jumpsuit in a rich, deep plum color. The fabric draped elegantly, cinched at the waist with a sleek gold belt. It was sophisticated, powerful, and undeniably gorgeous. She applied a subtle, dark berry lipstick and grabbed her clutch. When she stepped outside her apartment building, a sleek, black luxury sedan was waiting at the curb. The driver held the door open for her with a polite bow. The ride to the Wu estate was quiet, giving Diane time to wonder what on earth she was getting herself into. A mafia boss? A matchmaking child? A terrifying but fabulous grandmother? It sounded like the plot of a chaotic daytime drama. Yet, she could not deny the strange flutter in her chest when she thought about Zaid's dark eyes. The Wu penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of an exclusive residential tower overlooking the city skyline. When the private elevator doors opened, Diane stepped into a world of unbelievable luxury. The floors were dark, polished wood, the walls adorned with modern art, and floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking view of the sparkling city below. "Welcome," a deep voice murmured. Diane turned. Zaid was standing in the foyer, and the sight of him made her breath catch in her throat. He had changed out of his corporate suit and was now wearing a tailored black dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his forearms, revealing faded, intricate tattoos. He looked less like a CEO and more like the dangerous, magnetic underworld king she knew he was. But his eyes were entirely soft as he looked at her. "You look magnificent," Zaid said, taking a step toward her. "The plum color suits you." "Thank you," Diane replied, her voice remarkably steady despite the racing of her heart. "You clean up nicely yourself, Mr. Wu." "Just Zaid, please," he said, offering his arm to lead her into the grand dining room. The dining table was long enough to seat 20 people, but only 4 places were set at one end. Tay was already sitting at the table, wearing a very sharp miniature tuxedo, complete with a tiny bow tie. Madame Wu sat across from him, draped in dark silk, holding a crystal glass of water. "Diane!" Tay cheered, waving his fork in the air. "You came! And your hair is down. It looks very pretty." "Thank you, Tay. And you look incredibly handsome in your tuxedo." "Much better than the cleaner uniform," Diane smiled, taking the seat Zaid pulled out for her. Madame Wu leaned forward, resting her chin on her hands. "I must agree. The plum jumpsuit is a triumph, Diane. Now, let us eat." Zaid threatened the private chefs with early retirement if the food was not perfect tonight. "Mother," Zaid sighed, sitting down next to Diane. "I did not threaten them. I simply expressed the importance of the evening." Dinner was a spectacular affair. Course after course of exquisite cuisine was brought out by silent, professional staff. But the food was entirely overshadowed by the conversation. Madame Wu was an expert interrogator. Hiding her prodding questions behind charming anecdotes, she asked Diane about her career, her ambitions, and her family. Diane answered honestly, her natural confidence shining through. She did not back down from Madame Wu's intense gaze, matching the older woman's wit with sharp, clever responses of her own. Tay spent the entire meal acting as a tiny, highly obvious wingman. He kept casually dropping compliments about his father into the conversation. "Daddy is very strong," Tay announced loudly while cutting his steak. "He can lift a motorcycle. And he reads me bedtime stories every night. even the ones with the silly voices. He is very good at the dragon voice. Zaid closed his eyes, a faint flush creeping up his neck. Thank you, Tay. I think Diane understands. No, please continue. Diane laughed, taking a sip of her wine. I am very interested to hear about this dragon voice. Zaid looked at her, his lips twitching into a reluctant smile. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping an octave. I will only demonstrate the dragon voice, if absolutely necessary. It is a highly classified family secret. Diane felt a shiver run down her spine at the low, rumbling tone of his voice. She found herself leaning in as well, the massive dining room seeming to shrink until it was just the two of them. After dessert, Madame Wu stood up, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. Come along, Tay. It is past your bedtime. But Granny, the mission is not complete yet. Tay protested loudly. Madame Wu swiftly scooped the 8-year-old up, despite his squirming. The mission is in the final phase, my sweet boy. We must retreat and let the operatives handle the rest. Good night, Diane. It was a genuine pleasure. Do not let my son bore you. Good night, Madame Wu. Good night, Tay. Diane called out as the older woman carried the boy out of the room. The penthouse suddenly felt very quiet. Zaid stood up and gestured toward the massive glass doors leading out to the balcony. Would you care for some fresh air? Diane nodded, following him out into the cool night air. The city lights stretched out endlessly before them, a sea of glittering diamonds against the dark sky. The wind gently tugged at her braids. Zaid stood beside her, leaning his forearms against the glass railing. He was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the city, before finally turning to look at her. I want to apologize again for today, Zaid said softly. Not just for losing Tay, but for his overwhelming enthusiasm. He has taken it upon himself to fix my life. He loves you very much, Diane said, turning to face him. And he is a very smart boy. But he mentioned today that he is your biological son? Wait, no, he said his biological parents passed away. Zaid nodded, his expression turning solemn. My best friend. He was more like a brother to me. He and his wife were caught in a terrible accident just days before Tay was due. The doctors saved Tay, but we lost them both. I made a vow right then and there. I adopted him, gave him my name, and swore I would protect him with everything I have. He is my son in every way that matters. Diane felt her heart soften completely. The terrifying Mafia boss, the ruthless corporate king, was just a fiercely loyal man who had taken in an orphaned baby and raised him with endless love. That is a beautiful thing, Zaid, Diane said quietly. You are a good father, even if you do let him wander around with a mop sometimes. Zaid let out a low, breathy laugh, stepping a fraction closer to her. The distance between them was practically non-existent now. I am trying my best. But Tay is right about one thing. I have been drowning in my work for years. I convinced myself that building this empire was the only way to keep him safe. I shut everything else out. He reached out, his large, warm fingers gently brushing a stray braid away from Diane's cheek. The touch sent a jolt of electricity straight to her core. Until today, Zaid murmured, his dark eyes searching hers. I walked into that break room terrified out of my mind. And there you were, standing your ground, protecting a child you didn't even know, and putting me entirely in my place. I have never met anyone like you, Diane. Diane looked up at him, her pulse racing. He was dangerous, complicated, and brought a terrifying amount of baggage. But as she looked into his eyes, all she saw was a man who needed a partner, a man who loved fiercely, and a man who was looking at her like she was the only bright light in his dark world. You move fast, Zaid Wu, Diane whispered, a teasing smile playing on her lips. When I see exactly what I want, I do not hesitate, Zaid replied, his voice a smooth, velvet promise. I know my life is chaotic. I know my mother is intimidating, and my son is a menace. But I would very much like to take you on a real date, without the espionage and the janitor uniforms. Diane pretended to think about it, looking out at the city lights before turning her gaze back to his handsome, hopeful face. No red or green dresses, Diane stated firmly. "And we go somewhere with excellent food. I have a big appetite." A slow, breathtaking smile broke across Zaid's face, transforming him completely. He looked radiant, boyish, and entirely captivated. "Whatever you want, Diane, it is yours." He gently took her hand, lifting it to his lips and pressing a warm, lingering kiss to her knuckles. Diane felt a bright, warm flush rise to her cheeks. Inside the penthouse, hidden behind the heavy velvet curtains, Tay gave his grandmother a victorious high five. Mission Find Daddy a Wife was a complete and total success.